So I'm very excited to share with you today a bit about one of my favorite habitats, and with apologies to Thoreau for maybe mangling his original quote here, I think this is really an issue that has a lot of potential for our entire watershed. As Matt suggested earlier, it's about the rest of the land that feeds our rivers. So we'll start by taking a listen to one of these habitats. Maybe I'm wise to spend about 10 seconds of this brief presentation on silence, but this is the sound that you hear if you step to the edge of this wetland in breeding season. That picture was of a wetland site at Mary Lee that had come to be, like many around here, completely dominated by one plant species, reed canary grass. Still technically a wetland that had lost much of its value as habitat, including for the frogs whose calling is such a part of spring in our landscape. And our part of the world is meant to have anything but silent springs. These maps, as well as the ones that Matt shared earlier, show the extent to which our basin really is one that's full of wetlands of many types, and historically had many more of them than we see now. This part of the world much of the world has been affected by wetland loss, but our part has been perhaps uniquely affected by that, with about 90% of the wetland acreage in Indiana lost since settlement. Of course, we've realized this over time with our legislation reflecting our changed awareness, from laws in the mid-1800s that were encouraging people to drain wetlands as fast as possible, to those that have thought more holistically about the role of wetlands in our landscape. But much of the legal framework has focused on mitigation. You have to wonder, are mitigated wetlands enough? Here's an example from Iowa. Can its simple structure really mimic the complexity of the prairie populace that it was meant to replace? Here's a map of, much closer to home, the property at Mary Lee in Noble County, Indiana. The blue lakes highlighted inside there, and this wooden cutout shows you the estimated area of water cover before an 1899 agricultural ditch drained the water off this landscape to a large extent. Since, over the last 30 years, we've been working to restore wetlands on this property. One of the simplest examples is an old one we call Onion Bottom. 27 years ago, it looked like this, reed canary grass, similar to the one we looked at earlier. And then through simply dredging to break the tile drain that was draining this wetland, we were able to restore the hydrology to the hydrological levels to this place and restore it to the type of wetland that it is today that is really a great habitat for all kinds of new species. Those standing dead snags, the trees that have been established, themselves are supporting many species. Of particular note are all the waterfowl that love this little shallow habitat as a refuge from the deeper, busier waters of Bear Lake just on the other side. A similar example is a wetland we call Kessling Wetland. Again, dominated at that time by largely this one species. Again, it was a matter of breaking the tile drain, but also here we did some dredging to create deeper pools within the system. Just 2 years after that went in, this is what this landscape is beginning to look like. The presence of standing water is completely transforming the potential of this place as a habitat. And now, some years later, we get to the point where it forms this beautiful backdrop for students when they're in residence at Mary Lee, living in those dorms across the pond there. And this is an incredibly complex, interesting little habitat. Now, in the late 60s, that was cornfield. Marginal in all of its productive years, and maybe never needed to be corn in the first place. And then my favorite, most recent example is a place we call Wilmer Meadow, where we looked at the very beginning. Here, again, reed canary, it took a combination of rhythm of herbiciding and then tilling to try to set back the reed canary. But the next year after that process, we're right back to reed canary. So again, we hit it with herbicide, Roundup, and tilling, and then changing the hydrology just a bit, preparing the bed for planting, and putting in a variety of sedge meadow species. So now, just 5 years after that process, this is a diverse mixture of rushes, sedges, and a number of other forb species in there. It's a really gorgeous site. And it's home to many different kinds of interactions. So what am I calling for? Well, I just want to encourage each of us in this meeting today and beyond to be widening our view for what's possible with wetland restorations. There are so many small historic wetlands in our basin that with a little energy can add much beauty and function to our place. So let's keep in mind what a beautiful spot on earth we really do live in, and imagine even more of that beauty being present in our towns and our neighborhoods over time. May future generations in this place call themselves not just river, but also wetlands people. And in the meanwhile, we get some side benefits here. So in just 5 years now, I hear 7 different frog species calling across the breeding season in that same wetland that was silent before.